Good day everyone, my name is Isaac and I'm going to talk about Fin20016-Ethics and International Finance Assignment 2 Part A. And the topic I have chosen is China recent trade retaliation toward Australia. So the Australian-China relationship has traditionally been dominated by global geopolitical and strategy concerns. But since the 1980s, the two countries have built up a range of common bilateral and regional interests. So including strong economic ties. Nevertheless, as a growing world power, China still views individual bilateral relations in the context of wider global issues. So in particular, Australia's alliance with the US means that Australia's relations with China are directly linked to the health of the US-China relationship. So the relationship deteriorated several during 1996, an unusual and strident public criticism by the Chinese government. So Australia was torn between its connection with Asia and its traditional allegiance. So the tensions were reduced by the end of the years, but the issue at stake were an indication of the underlying sensitivity in Australia-China relation, which will continue to be a challenge for Australia in the future. So a number of actions by the new Australian government elected in March 1996 led China to believe that Australia was changing its China policy to one which was more pro-US and less friendly to China. Trade retaliation occurs. So China and Australia, two of Asia-Pacific's biggest trading partners, have been locked in political conflict for the past year, resulting in a series of trade disruptions that have not yet been resolved. Yet, on April 19 last year, Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne appeared on national television calling for a global inquiry into the origins of coronavirus pandemic, including China's handling of the initial outbreak in the city of Wuhan without prior diplomatic consultation with Beijing. So in the same week, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison suggested WHO investigators in Wuhan should be armed with the same power as United Nations-backed weapon inspector. So China government was outraged after the report, since there was no diplomatic communication between Australia and China prior to the international probe. So Donald Trump's accusation at the weekend that Beijing could have done more to prevent the deadly spread of the disease was yet met with fierce criticism from China's state media. So in May 2020, shortly after the conflict started, China imposed duty on Australian barley following an 18-month anti-dumping investigation. The duty imposed were at the highest end of possible penalties and rendered Australian barley uncompetitive in the Chinese market. The final blow to Australian export came in March this year, when China formalized temporarily anti-dumping duties on cheap Australian wine, which is claimed was damaging the domestic wine industry. The duty of between 116.2% and 218.4% were higher than the preliminary tariffs imposed in November. China Beijing has since taken several measures restricting Australian imports, ranging from levying tariffs to imposing other bans and restrictions that has affected Australian goods including barley, wines, beef, cotton and coal. So red meat was one of the industry that has impacted in Australia after the China suspended. So China suspended import from 6 Australian beef suppliers. For the first 5 bans, China reportedly cited labeling issue and health certificates. So the local media also reported this month that Australian lamb exporters say that they were unable to get back into Chinese market under COVID-19 restriction, and that the country's honey and fruits export to China are at risk. So other than red meat, cotton was one of the industry that has been impacted. So according to the 2 Australian cotton industry group, said China was discouraging its spinning mills from using cotton imported from down under. China has imported quota of around 894,000 tons of cotton that are subjected to minimal tariffs, according to a US Department of Agriculture report. So anything imported beyond that limit reported face a stiff 40% duties. Australian Agriculture Minister told CNBC that the government worries Chinese officials are telling miners to block Australian cottons from being counted within that initial quota. So other than red meats and cotton, lobster was one of the industry that has been impacted. The local media report said that tons of live lobster were stranded at Chinese airport and clearinghouses, awaiting inspection from Chinese custom officials. So Australian Seafood Trade Advisory Group said that the industry temporarily stopped rock lobster export to China and was working with Chinese and Australian authorities to respond to Beijing's new borders inspection protocols. The group said planning was also underway to find other destinations for lobster, including Australia's domestic market. So China has also banned timbers imports from the Australian state of Queensland, Victoria, and now more recently South Australia and Tasmania. The Chinese customs has since January detected many cases of live pests in timber imported from Australia, such as longicron. These live pests, if allowed into China, will gravely endanger China forestry production and ecological security. So did Australia suffer economically as a result of trade disruption? In my opinion, not quite. Australia's export to China reached a 145.2 billion, which is US 731.8 billion in 2020. That was just 2.16% less than 2019's total of a 148.4 billion, which was the highest since 1988. The bulk of this export were iron ore, which has been recorded price that have been helped Australian miners a windfall. The surge in iron ore made up for losses in banned export from Australia as well as other export that slowed due to political risks. Removing iron ore from the numbers, the Australian Trade Department said last month the value of trade with China for almost all of other industries has fallen 40%. For example, export of coal and wine at the start of this year was nearly zero. So going to the next slide, how has Australia responded? So in December last year, Australia lodged a complaint with the World Trade Organization WTO over China's 80.5% tariffs on its berry export. The Australian wine industry and government are also considering a complaint at the WTO over the duty on Australian wine. Though this has not been finalized, since its accession to the WTO in 2001, China has launched 4 anti-dumping and anti-subsidy cases against Australia, of which 2 were barley and wine cases. Australia has also initiated 87 cases against Chinese export. So what is the recommended action to Australia? So initially, the trade is favorable to both China and Australia. So China relies on Australian resources and China is Australia's largest export market. So since a result, trade tension between the two countries would be a lose-lose situation as no one would profit. So in my opinion, the Australian government should identify practical issues that we can address alongside China, looking for solutions that are mutually beneficial to both countries, that brings in countries from around Asia and that use multilateral bodies. So Australian government should also escalate the resolution process by asking the WTO to establish a dispute settlement panel for both countries. So that's all for my part. Thank you so much for listening.